So, welcome. This is Ensuring Disability Access and Inclusion in the Classroom. And this specific training is for the Graduate School Professional Development Series. And so I just want to let you know that we have a conversational style. So if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to really just jump in if you have a question. Or of course, you can use the raise the hand feature. And I'm also more than open to take questions through the chat feature. And then I also want to let you know that we recently enabled a new feature called the live transcript within Zoom. And so if you hover down on the bottom of your screen, you're going to see that closed captioning logo with the live transcript. So you're more than welcome to enable that. I do always like to explain though that automatic captions are more of a universal design for approach. They're very helpful for all audiences. However, if you yourself are ever teaching a class or doing a presentation, if you have someone who is deaf or hard of hearing that makes a specific accommodation request, then you will want to always coordinate and work with the appropriate office to get a third-party service for captioning. But otherwise, anytime you're presenting or if you're a GA or TA and you're teaching a class, I definitely encourage you to enable that feature because it's helpful for students who may be distracted, maybe English language learners, or may just like to also read and hear things at the same time. So it's a very helpful feature. And my name is Stephanie Dawson, and I'm the director of the Miller Center for Student Disability Services here at Miami. And just to give you an idea, I have been with the university in a full-time capacity for about 11 years within the Office of Student Disability Services. And prior to that, my graduate placement actually was on Miami's regional campuses in counseling and disability services. And so although I'm a University of Cincinnati alum, my graduate placement was at Miami. So that is how I became part of this wonderful institution. And so I've been around the student disability services world for a while here, and we have just made so many important changes. So over the years, just to kind of follow along with changing student needs and just emerging trends when it comes to disability access. I would like to just give each of you an opportunity because I know sometimes there could be specific questions related to the graduate student experience, particularly being a GA or TA. So if you have certain questions that you came wanting to have answered, I just want to give you an opportunity to ask those now or put them in the chat. All right. So it doesn't look like we have any specific questions right away, but if something arises, again, just feel free to hop in or use the chat feature. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I can make this presentation available. I can share it with you. So just let me know if you would like to do that. And Haley, I could send it to you as well if you wanted to do a blast later on for any particular reason. So give me just one moment here. All right. If up, know you're viewing the presentation.
I'm just seeing like a white line right now.
Okay. See what we got here. Is that still what you're seeing?
Yes, it's a black screen with a white line in the middle.
Oh, okay, here we go. You should be good now.
Yep, there we go. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So that is always important to share and confirm for sure. All right. So, um, some of the things we're going to be looking at today are just a general overview of student disability services and what we do here at the university, policies and procedures for providing accommodations. And although it says faculty responsibilities, I think that's important to cover because many of you are in GA and TA positions. And so anytime you're in a teaching capacity, you want to be aware of what your responsibilities are. And I will also talk about ways that you can communicate with faculty that may be supervising your GA and TA positions so that you can make sure that accommodation information is shared with you. And that specifically relates there to the bullet that you see a couple down, the SAM, the faculty portal. We'll talk about the fact that you can have access to that as a GA or TA and how to go about requesting that. And then student responsibilities for receiving accommodations, because it really is about understanding, the interactive process involves student disability services, anyone in a teaching capacity, instructional staff, and then the student. So it's important to understand what the student is responsible for. And we'll just briefly touch on to the different accessibility and academic support resources at Miami. So I do think it is very important to be aware that Miami actually does have a few campuses and that students have access to services on all of our campuses. So we have our Oxford location, which is located in the Shriver Center. So very nicely located on campus, right across from Armstrong. And although it's on the 3rd floor, it is an accessible building. We have floor buttons also in the elevator. So we really like this location of Shriver Center, and it seems to be very easy for students to access. There are also regional campuses in Hamilton, Ohio and Middletown, Ohio, and you just want to be aware that there are student disability services coordinators on each of those campuses. And when students attend Luxembourg, or if they attend the VOA campus, Voice of America campus in Westchester, technically those locations are what we call learning centers. So all of those students are actually tied back to one of the 3 campuses, and they can receive accommodations and request and receive services. And we allow students to meet with us either in person or virtually. So if someone is participating in a completely online program through something such as Project Dragonfly or through one of our regional campus offerings that are completely online, they still have full access to our services to engage and request accommodations. So our staff, we actually have 3 access coordinators, one who is not pictured here because that has been a vacant position. And so we have been able to fill that position with a new staff member that will be joining us in May. So the office is really comprised of the leadership, which is myself, the director, and then we have our assistant director, Dan Darko, and Cynthia Seidel, Hope Sweeney, and then in the future, Anastasia Blessy. Those are our access coordinators. And then we also have our program associate, Mitzi Campbell, and that is our full staff. And so we all really work to, be aware of all the different, areas, topical areas as it relates to student disability services. But then there are some specialties among our team. For example, Cynthia Seidel, she takes the lead on all of our deaf and hard of hearing related accommodation. Hope Sweeney, she takes the lead on things related to vision. So, and then of course, Dan and I, we really focus on strategic partnerships, really kind of leading our education and training efforts, some of those visioning and strategic things related to the office. What is really important, and I can never stress this enough, is anytime you are providing accommodations or also just navigating your academic program yourself as a graduate student, it's really important to be conscientious of what your orientation is to disability and to really be self-aware. How do I think about disability? What were the messages that I received growing up about disability? And how do those things inform how I interact in the world and with others today? Disability is something that has had a lot of stigma historically. Oftentimes it is seen as a status that is not desired and that people should be shameful of. And when people come from that orientation, they may not even realize it if they grew up in a very biased environment, but that can inform how you see disability and how you work with students, and also how you conceive of yourself. So it's really important to be thinking about the model of disability. And there is a specific model that our services are based in, and that is the social model of disability. And so I will just briefly touch on really two models of disability that you want to be aware of. The first one is the medical model of disability. And that is really an older model of disability that our office, we partner in a collective effort to disrupt and dismantle the medical model of disability. And so the medical model of disability, it really focuses on the individual and the medical community. And it really says that the individual is broken as a result of the disability, and it is the responsibility of the person themselves, with the help of the medical community, to fix or cure the disability. And that is the only focus of the medical model. And it actually considers and views disability as a problem that should just be alleviated, and there's no emphasis or reference to social responsibility. The social model of disability, again, our office describes to this model of disability. When you look at specific laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act is also based in the social model of disability. And the social model of disability, it does not dismiss that there may be physical or mental differences or impairment within an individual, but it takes a different stance on where the responsibility lies. And so what it says is, although an individual may have a physical or mental impairment, in fact, what disables the person within any given society are the barriers that the person faces within that society. These barriers can exist within the physical realm as well as within the social realm. Barriers can be things like actual physical barriers, not having ramps, not having accessible doors, having lighting that's not adjustable and is very fluorescent, and that can be overstimulating to the system. Those are examples of things that can be barriers within the physical realm. And then we also have social barriers. And so these can be an environment where people see disability as problematic, where people with disabilities are not given equal opportunity, where they are seen as not being intelligent, where they are being treated like they are children because there is an assumption that they cannot care for themselves and be independent. Those would be examples of social barriers. And again, you always want to keep in mind, these barriers can happen at a micro, meso, or macro level, right? So a person can experience kind of in their social realm. You can have organizations that have these barriers entrenched within them. And then we also want to be looking at larger society. And so there are some resources, if you guys were ever interested, that I could share with you, where you could also take a look at some of just the differences in disability laws throughout the world, because it's quite interesting to see what societies have these very comprehensive laws versus those who do not. So, you do want to be aware for your own purpose as a graduate student, but really also in your capacity as a GA or TA, it's important to understand, what the Miller Center, who we really are within the context of that instructional staff, that teaching capacity, and what we're here to do in terms of, helping you make sure that students have an inclusive classroom experience. So yes, this campus is located in the United States of America, and there is a very comprehensive civil rights law, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and then there's also Section 504 of the Vocational Rehabilitation Act. So there is a legal obligation to provide accommodation, but that just gives us our floor. We really are here as an office to, yes, make sure that our legal obligation is met. But then we also do a lot of things around promoting disability culture and disability justice. So your eligibility determination and all of the nuts and bolts of actually receiving accommodations that a student may be legally eligible for, that comes through our office, and we do use a database called the Students Accessing Miami portal to manage those processes. But then we also do a lot of things around just coordinating the accommodations, right? So it may be housing, dining, classroom accommodations. And then we work to make sure that organizations such as the Students with Disabilities Advisory Council have appropriate support and resources to make sure that there's a student organization dedicated and promoting disability culture. They also act in an advisory capacity to us. We have special events, things such as our Welling Lecture Series. We sometimes will do film series where we really do a deeper dive into disability culture and disability justice. And that's something that is particularly important to us, in addition to partnering with our information technology colleagues to ensure that all of our digital systems, software, and hardware are accessible within the institution. And as you can see here from the slide that's shared, we serve a broad range of students with a variety of disabilities and medical conditions. And so that's also important to note as well, because the Americans with Disabilities Act, it has a very broad definition of disability. It is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities or bodily functions. That list of bodily functions, major life activities, is very expansive. And so sometimes people don't realize that, yes, if you are a student with a psychological disability, or you have a student who maybe is newly diagnosed in their freshman and sophomore year, say with anxiety or depression, because we know psychological disabilities often present in adolescence for the first time. Yes, those students are entitled to accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act if they so wish to request them. And so sometimes people will have a more narrow view of disability and think that services are only available, say, to someone who has a vision or a hearing loss or uses a wheelchair, but it's a much broader definition, in fact. And so before we move on to types of accommodations, I do just want to circle back to emphasizing the social model of disability a bit. And my apologies for switch here, but there is a quick little clip that I would like to just play. And it just does a really good job of really showing how the social model of disability, and it kind of breaks it down a little bit more than my explanation. And then we'll go back into talking specifically about what types of accommodations we provide. And this video does not have sound, just so you're aware. Okay, great. And so I just want guys that our services are based in the social model. And so we are going to talk about accommodations, but one thing that I'm a firm believer in is we really have to acknowledge the fact that accommodations technically are a retrofit, okay? So there is something called universal design and universal design for learning. In its most basic sense, universal design is where you intentionally create an environment or a product with the end user in mind, and you're specifically designing for the full range of diversity that you may have and people that may interact with a specific space or interact with a specific product. And you can apply those principles to the learning environment where you're intentionally designing in your course that is as accessible as possible for the point of design. That way you don't have to go back and make changes on the back end for any one particular person, because accessibility elements are already built in. So for example, you may develop a syllabus, but once upon a time, and sometimes this can still happen, people may have just printed off the syllabus and then pass it out in class, and that was the only access that you had to the syllabus. If you were going to design that from the beginning in a more accessible manner, you would basically design the syllabus in a digital format. The document would be accessible so that it would integrate with any sort of assistive technology that the person is using, say, for example, a screen reader or text to speech. So you would try to design it and make sure that it's in an accessible format. Microsoft Word is really your best option anytime you're creating a syllabus. And then you would make sure that you post that syllabus digitally. That way people can access it no matter where they are. When they open it, it's going to integrate with any technology that they might be using if they need to hear it read aloud. But then you could also make a decision to have some paper copies available on that first day of class for people who prefer to learn in that way. And so that's a prime example of how you're giving things in a digital format, paper format. The digital format is accessible, posted in a place where people can get to it at any given time throughout the semester that they need to give it to. And there you have hit a lot of universal design principles, such as flexibility and use, ease of access, things like that. And so if you're ever interested in universal design, you can reach out to our office or Access and Use Center, which I'll talk about later. And we're always happy to give, even like a deeper training on that, if that's something that you guys would desire for this professional development series. So types of accommodations, right? So ideally, things are going to be designed on the front end in any class or any area of the university in the most accessible way possible. But there are still going to be accommodations and things that students need that may not have been addressed at the point of design. That is where you start getting into accommodations. So this list that you see here, I'm not going to read it, to you verbatim, but this gives you a good idea of the broad range of accommodations that we are coordinating in our office. So we definitely, testing and classroom accommodations, those are our top categories of accommodations that we coordinate. And then we do also assess if a student will need assistive technology or alternate format. Maybe they come in the door knowing what they want to use, or perhaps they're new to using alt format, which is where you get textbooks in a digital format so they can be read aloud, or with a screen reader, or they may be new to assistive technology or never have used it. So we can also help students explore if that's something that they want to incorporate into their toolkit. Something that sometimes people don't realize is that there are also a number of housing and dining accommodations that we coordinate. Things like individualized meals that may meet some dietary restrictions and allergy concerns, housing accommodations, and then students are also permitted to have their emotional support or service animals on campus. And so emotional support animals are only allowed in the residence halls, and I will touch on that during this presentation. That way, if you're in the classroom as a GA or TA and there's an animal in the room that you're not sure about, you'll know how to handle that. All students that are affiliated with Student Disability Services in the university, they also receive advanced registration. And so if ever you are helping out with any sort of academic advising, or maybe you get a question from a student, you know, you want to be aware that if they are formally affiliated with their office, they are, you know, they have access to advanced registration. So, you know, typically our office serves about 8 to 10% of the student body. I will tell you that we did see that creep up here in the last year, up into that 12% range. So really about 10% of the student body is affiliated with our office at any given time, but we continue to see this steady trend of growth. People with disabilities are the largest minority group in the world. And when you look at the US, it's estimated that, you know, 20% of people are people with disabilities. So, you know, it would make sense that our numbers would continue to creep up as things like societal stigma decreases, as we do more things to streamline our access to services so that it's easier for students to be affiliated with us. Because again, if you're thinking about the society at large having about 20%, with our numbers kind of creeping up, it just shows, right, we're getting to a little bit more of something that in terms of representation that's consistent with that, you know, that national rate, right? And so anytime you're looking at, you know, where you've got 5 or 6% of your student body is students with disabilities, but you know that typically there's a representation of about 20% of people with disabilities in society, that's a pretty large gap, and that's pretty well an indicator in any institution that maybe you could be doing some more things to connect with people who have this identity. And we have worked really hard to do that. And we've gotten up into that 10, now into that 12% range. So that's an indicator, right, that yes, we are connecting with students in a meaningful way, and that makes them want to engage with our office if they need it. Fastest growing categories, psychological and medical disabilities. Our students with medical disabilities, that category is actually growing at a faster rate now than our students with psychological disabilities. We're seeing more things like sleep disorders and also gastrointestinal conditions. And so, you know, I mean, that actually makes a lot of sense when you look at our psychological disability category. Students with anxiety disorders actually represent the largest section of that particular category. And so when you think about things, you know, like, you know, mood regulation, you know, sleep, your gut health, right? These are some of the things that our students are really dealing with. And so they're requesting accommodations for that. And then also students with ADHD, that's another one of our top categories of students. So as you can see, accommodations touch a lot of courses, right? In fall 2020, 5,116 courses had at least one student with an accommodation request. So if you're a GA or TA, yes, there are definitely students in your classes that have accommodations. And so you just want to make sure that, you know, your faculty are actually communicating with you in a way where you understand what these needs are so that you can be providing them when you're interacting with students. And then of course, with the pandemic, you know, there have been new considerations, particularly when it comes to things like testing accommodations, deadlines, really working with faculty and GAs and TAs on making sure that even in that remote learning environment, accessibility is being considered. And so it's really important to be thinking about what platforms are you using. There's a lot of conversation, obviously, around test proctoring software. There's some accessibility considerations there. So those are some of the things that have come up, just a couple of things that have come up more often as a result of the pandemic. So, you know, what you should be aware of is that students have to self-disclose disability in order to receive accommodations in the college environment. when they're in, if they got any sort of accommodation in the K through 12 system, that is a different law. That's the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. And K through 12, they have a responsibility to actually identify students with disabilities, but that is not the case in higher ed. And so disabled students, and so I just want to kind of break for a minute, and you're going to hear me use students with disabilities and disabled students. You'll hear me use those interchangeably. And that's also just be aware that we're seeing just a change in language. In the past, person first language, when I say students with disabilities, that was really the standard, but we're really seeing a shift towards embracing what we call identity first language, which is where you would say disabled student. And identity first language is really just focused on, embracing disability, seeing it as something that should be celebrated, versus person first language, which really emphasizes focusing on the person and the multiple identities that they have versus only focusing on the disability. And we tend to just defer to personal preference when we are working with students. And then in this presentation, you will hear me use both language styles interchangeably. So I just want to drop that little nugget and draw your attention in case you notice that I'm using different wording. So again, disabled students have a responsibility to self-disclose, and we have really tried to make that easy. So the way that we go about doing that is what you see here, which is our students accessing Miami SAM portal. And so students go to miamioh.edu/SAM. We educate them on how to connect with us in a variety of places and spaces so that they're seeing it multiple times. And students do a new student application in order to affiliate with our office. It is a very short application that you see here. We try to make sure we're very inclusive. So while our university database, we're still working on making sure that we're using chosen names versus dead names. We have tried to go ahead and build that into our system now so we can make sure we're always using chosen names. But students go in, share their demographic information, disability information, and then they have the option, of course, to upload verifying documentation. And we do have to have some sort of verification in most cases. However, if the disability is readily apparent, we do not have to necessarily require documentation or verification. Student self-report is actually our primary form of documentation, and then the written documentation verification from the medical provider is our secondary form of documentation, just so you're aware of that. So students request, submit documentation, they meet with an access coordinator, and again, it's a collaborative meeting, right? Where our office, we don't dictate what accommodation students need. We talk to the student about their disability experience, how it impacts them on a daily basis. And then we really co-create what accommodations does the student want to use for their time at Miami. And then it is their responsibility to request accommodations in their SAM portal every semester. Accommodations can be requested at any time in the semester. There is no deadline. And so disability can occur at any time. There is no deadline on when a person can acquire a disability. So, we've had students who may have a very serious car accident midway through the semester, where they sustain serious injuries that are going to be disabling in nature. And those students have every right to request when, they acquire that disability. Also, students sometimes may choose to start out the semester, but they may identify a need for accommodations as the weeks move on, and they are able to do that. But you always want to remember, accommodations are never retroactive. They only begin from the date of formal request. They can be applied retroactively at the discretion of the instructor. The instructor just wants to make sure that if they're doing any kind of retroactive application, of course, that they are going to be doing that consistently and equitably across the board. The only time we really see that is when you may have a situation where a student has really, become ill, and maybe they got behind, say, on 1 or 2 assignments. They make a decision to come disclose to us, request a reasonable accommodation of extended deadline. The faculty is in agreement with that for the semester moving forward, but then the faculty may also say, okay, I am comfortable with, in this scenario, you going ahead and having an extension on that 1 assignment that was missed right before you actually went to student disability services. And so sometimes we will see faculty that are willing to do that, because again, with a lot of students, particularly undergrads, this is new to them, or they may be dealing with a new medical condition. And so there may just need to be some flexibility there. And, typically, that is doable, and we're supportive. So, but every case is different. And again, accommodations must be reasonable and appropriate. So it's got to fit within that standard of reasonable and appropriate. Now, sometimes, you guys want to be aware as GAs or TAs, what we encourage faculty to do is that when they receive a faculty notification for a letter for a student, yes, we tell students, you need to make contact with your faculty. You need to engage in the interactive process and talk with your faculty member. Most students do, but on occasion they don't. And so we do encourage faculty, when they get an accommodation letter, just to go ahead and reach out to the student, acknowledge that, hey, I received this faculty notification letter. I'm happy to provide accommodations. And, I would encourage you to meet with me during office hours so that we can talk about ensuring that all of your accommodations will be met. So that's something that we're encourage faculty to do. They may enlist you as a GA or TA to help with that process. And there can be a power differential between students and their instructor. And so a lot of times that initial email, it just helps the student feel more comfortable and at ease about actually coming to you and coming to the faculty member to talk about accommodations. So, if you're working collaboratively with the faculty member, you as a GA or TA may want to ask them if they're doing that, or maybe even, offer to help. But that can be very helpful to students. And so the most important thing to be aware of is the interactive accommodation process. At the end of the day, it is about a conversation between the student, faculty, and appropriate campus entities to understand, how does the student's disability impact them on a daily basis, and then what's needed to eliminate barriers, and doing it within the context of what is reasonable and appropriate. And so a student may have a very individualized accommodation request, and that needs to always be looked at versus going to a hard, fast, no, absolutely not. A student may come and they may say, I sustained a brain injury and I'm within the first 6 months of recovering. And, I need an exam broken out over 2 days just for, during this first 3 months while I'm recovering. Some faculty may be inclined to say, oh no, there's absolutely no way that I could do that. But in fact, the obligation is to engage in the interactive accommodation process and to explore with our office, the faculty and the student, whether or not that is a reasonable and appropriate accommodation that can be coordinated. There may be some circumstances where that would be reasonable, and there could be some where it may not be. But the fact is, the interactive accommodation process of exploring it, understanding what the barrier is, and then looking at all the different options to mitigate the barrier, that process must be engaged in versus just saying, no, absolutely not, it's not possible. So, some procedures just to be aware of are listed and linked here. These are all available on our website. And so I won't necessarily go deep into the nitty-gritty on these procedures just for the sake of time. Be aware that they are on our website. I will touch on the high points for each. So with attendance accommodations, there are some students that, due to the nature of their disability, it could be that their disability is episodic in nature, or it could be maybe that they have some routine intensive health appointments associated with managing their condition. They may have an attendance accommodation where they can have flexibility to the standard class attendance policy when reasonable and appropriate. For all of those classes, students have to formally request an accommodation, and then the faculty does receive what's called an attendance agreement, which has a series of questions to help the faculty communicate to our office and the student what amount of flexible attendance can be reasonably given for that particular class. And then our office does take a look at it, just to confirm that it's within the parameters of what would be considered a reasonable and appropriate accommodation. And the student is notified of that. And if any issues arise around excessive absences or anything that goes above and beyond what was outlined in the agreement, then we can always provide assistance, support, and guidance in those instances. COVID-19 procedures, really just something to be aware of, especially in your capacity as a GA or TA. We provide a number of COVID-19 related accommodations. For example, students who are deaf or hard of hearing, we do outreach to their faculty around things like transparent face masks. When we had students that maybe had a required face-to-face class, but they had an underlying condition that placed them at risk of a severe COVID-19 infection. Obviously, this is before we entered this period of vaccine access. We coordinated some remote instruction accommodations for those students. So those are a couple of examples. But with the pandemic, we did develop specifically a COVID-19 accommodation procedure, which may turn into a pandemic accommodation procedure. We may change the name of that at some point. Again, students can request alternate format, and just be aware that there's something called preterm consultation. So if a student has a vision or hearing related disability, we do outreach to faculty the semester beforehand to talk with them about the class, what content will be used, and to help them plan ahead of time and proactively on how that content is going to be accessible to the student so that it can integrate with any sort of assistive technology, such as a screen reader. There's also a device called the Roger Pen, which transmits audio from the speaker directly to a person's hearing aid. And so we'll have proactive conversations with faculty the semester beforehand. So sometimes if you're teaching a class and there's someone in the class with a vision or hearing related accommodation, it's very likely that the faculty member for that class has actually met with us the semester beforehand to start to plan the accessibility of the content. And then of course, students can have ESAs in their residence halls. Service animals are permitted in the classroom. And the majority of our students actually use testing center accommodations, things like extended testing time, distraction reduced testing environment. So extended testing time can obviously be provided in the digital environment through setting changes within Canvas, and some other platforms that people may be using may have a setting option. And then when on campus, students may choose to take their exams with accommodations such as extended time or have access to a private testing room by testing in the Ranella Testing Center. And that's just really high level about each of those. But the main thing is just to know we have a faculty tools section on our website that can be helpful to you in your capacity as a GA or TA, because it'll have all of the procedural information on there. Some of the procedures are also located under our student tools section. So you're welcome to go there at any time, and we, definitely keep our website updated. I do want to let you know there's some considerations for animals on campus. The main thing to know is that there are 3 classes of animals: service animals, emotional support animals, and pets, okay? And they are not all the same. So service animals are covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Service animals, legally, they can only be dogs or miniature horses. And service animals actually perform a task. And so, you know, you're seeing that in this example here of a specific task that the animal may perform. Legally, we are not allowed to ask for documentation of the animal, and we are not allowed to ask the person to have their animal perform the task. All we are permitted to ask is it a service animal that is required for disability? And if the person says yes, that is all the verification that we can do. Service animals, again, covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act, allowed to go anywhere with the person. So the only animal you should be seeing in the classroom is a service animal, okay? And so again, the 2 questions: is the animal required because of disability? What work is it trained to perform? That you cannot ask the animal to, the person to have the animal demonstrate. You cannot ask about the person's disability specifically, and you cannot ask for documentation. Emotional support animals are a different class of animal. They're actually covered under the Fair Housing Act. And these are animals that do just what it sounds like. They provide emotional support to people whose disability may impact their mental or psychological adjustment. And they are very helpful animals. And truthfully, if you have a pet, right, there's tons of research that talks about the benefit of, you know, having a pet. And so emotional support animals are kind of that, you know, plus some additional support when you have someone who's managing a psychological condition. But keep in mind, emotional support animals, there's no animal type or breed restriction. Emotional support animals can be any type of animal. So we've had reptiles, you know, we've had bunnies, as you can see here, all sorts of animals, ferrets, you know, you could even have, someone could have spiders, right? A collection of spiders as their emotional support animal. Emotional support animals have to be under the control of the owner at all times, but are only permitted in residence halls, in the owner's room, or in common spaces under the control of the owner. So I just want to draw your attention to these charts here that you see. I do know that this is going to be recorded, so keep in mind that this chart presentation, accessible versions of it, can be requested at any time by contacting sds@miamioh.edu. There are accessible versions of this presentation and this chart available. But if you take a look at this, this is just something that you can reference if you want to understand for each different realm of accommodation what the student responsibility is and what the faculty responsibility is. And so I'm just going to move forward to this next slide and take a minute just to allow you to take a quick look at that. And this is just more for reference. Again, if you're in a situation where you're not clear on what should I do or the student do, or my faculty is doing something, but I as the GA or TA, I'm unsure, we have an open door policy. So you basically just reach out, you call us, stop by, or email, and we'll help you figure out whatever the situation is. We're very friendly and helpful, and that's critical. Like, we pride ourselves on that. And if ever you feel like you're not having that experience, you just let me know and we'll figure it out. So I want to talk about the SAM portal really quickly, and then I will stop here in case there are any questions. There is a faculty portal where faculty can go in and view accommodations for all the students in their classes that have requested them. I just want you guys to be aware, in your GA or TA capacity, you can be added as an instructor on the course so that you get all of the notifications, requests to take an exam, if someone has extended time, things like that. So your faculty, they have the ability to add you in the faculty portal, or they can email us at that sbs@miamioh.edu address, and they can let us know, hey, I have these GAs or TAs for this particular course and section. Will you please add them to the portal? So I think, one of the things I've been hearing is like, some GAs and TAs are feeling like they're not always aware when students have accommodations. And the simplest solution is really for you guys to be added to whatever class you're teaching. And so if your faculty doesn't prompt you to do that, we're working to do more education with faculty so they're aware that they can do that. But if for some reason they don't offer, it's appropriate for you to ask if you can be added. And so you would just ask them. They can do it themselves in the portal, or they can email us and we'll get you added. Faculty notification letters come through. This is a sample letter. They outline all the accommodations that the student is eligible for. And if you were added to the portal, you would have access to view this information. There is also something called a testing agreement. And that's when you have a student who's going to be using services through Ranella Testing Center to get their extra time, private testing room. And that agreement is just to communicate to the testing center how you want the exam to be handled. And so just be aware, we've got Ranella Learning Center, tutoring, academic counseling, but Access MU Center, that's another office that you really want to be aware of. And they help with all of the assistive technology, captioning services, accessible technology procurement. And we work really, really closely with them on making sure our digital systems are accessible. And they're located in Shriver Center. And then here's just another list of some additional resources. There's something that you should be aware of, Blackboard Ally in particular. You can enable Blackboard Ally in your Canvas course as a student or as an instructor, and it has a variety of accessibility features. And if you go to the Access MU website, they have a lot of detailed information on Blackboard Ally. But if there was one tool, I would say for Canvas that you just want to learn more about in terms of accessibility, I would say hands down right now it's Blackboard Ally. And you guys have a lot on your plate as grad students, so I would just say learn about Blackboard Ally if you wanted to learn about one tool that was going to help you on the accessibility front, whether it's as a student or in a teaching capacity. And so Access MU, they've got a lot of good information about Blackboard Ally on their site. Just want to reiterate that. So we do have 4 minutes. But good questions can still be asked in 4 minutes. So does anyone have any questions? I'll check the chat as well. Okay, great. So again, I do see this message. I just want to reiterate, most common accommodations requested are testing accommodations and classroom accommodations. Those are our top 2 categories. And Carrie Ann, again, great question. Should students be sharing this information with you? As the GA or TA, I think the best way to get the information is to ask your faculty to add you to the class so that you can pop into the SAM portal. They can add you themselves, or they can email our office and we can add you to the course. But students aren't always necessarily, we encourage them to talk to the instructor of record about their accommodations. But again, that flow of communication might not always get to you. The best way is for you to be added to the class so you can see it in the portal. And I will just Oh, yes. Thank you, Carrie Ann. And so that's what I think I will end it on. If you guys can just share this information with other grad students, that would be great. We are really working on just trying to, strengthen our partnership with the graduate school and with graduate students. And so we see obviously Graduate Student Association as a key part in that. But if you need anything from us, or you feel like there's a communication breakdown, just let us know. We're always happy to help, and we're always happy to offer different training opportunities. So, we'd be glad to come back, present on a different topic, maybe even bring in our Access MU partners if that's something you'd be interested in. And with that, I will go ahead and close out unless anyone has any additional questions.